You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, Ivanka Trump has now testified in the New York Attorney General case. First of all, she's been signaling that she isn't involved in this at all. Is she going to be able to skirt away without any responsibility here?
You know, she really already has skirted away without any responsibility. Remember that she was severed out of the case. It was really because the involvement that she had was beyond the statute of limitations. At least that's what the ruling involved. So she really is not on the hook for any liability here, but she was still an important witness. And the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, wanted to put her on the stand to see what she could get out of her testimony.
Okay, well, to that point, we're going to get into the specifics of her testimony, but would you say that her testimony did more harm or good here?
You know, I think it was kind of a push. You know, she did a little bit of harm. There were some things that were definitely a danger zone where she not only didn't help her father and her brothers, but I think she was also signaling that she wasn't all that comfortable with some of what went on the valuation front. And she tried to really distance herself from that. But, you know, she didn't do too much harm because, not surprisingly, she had a staggering loss of memory. You know, either she couldn't remember things or she was feigning not being able to remember things.
Funny how that always works out. You have these young, capable people, but the second they get on those stands, the dementia really kicks in.
It's amazing how that happens. You know, anytime they seem to get into dangerous territory, all of a sudden,
poof,
she couldn't remember. So, yeah. You know, I've seen that movie before in court, and usually that is not a winning strategy. It's more a sign of weakness because it's clear you're trying to sort of dodge potentially damaging questions. And I have a feeling Judge Engoron will not be fooled for one moment.
Okay, well, here she had the opportunity, even though she kind of was able, to your earlier point, to evade responsibility, she had the opportunity to testify and actually defend her father and brothers. How did that effort go? Was there anything that stuck out at you from her testimony?
You know, here was one that I thought was a really interesting moment. Frankly, I kind of enjoyed it. And I think if you read between the lines, she refused to come to her father's defense. There was testimony about the fact that she was leasing a penthouse apartment in a Trump Park Avenue property, and she had an option to buy it. The option to buy it was, assuming this wasn't like a deep family discount, the option to buy it was at $8.5 million. But guess what? Trump then turned around and put it on his statement of financial condition form, claiming it was worth $20.8 million. And it's funny because the next question from Tish James' lawyer, a team member, was, well, did you have anything to do with preparing the financial condition statement where there is that dramatic disparity in values? You can purchase it for 8.5, but your father's claiming it's worth 20.8 million. She said, listen, I made it clear to you all before, I assume meaning in her deposition testimony, I had nothing to do with preparing that a statement of financial conditions. Now, I don't know her tone of voice. I don't know her demeanor because, Brian, we're reading it off the cold record. We don't have the benefit of having cameras in the courtroom. But I'll tell you, as an old prosecutor, when I read that, it screamed to me that she wanted to distance herself as much as possible from that pretty dramatic disparity in valuation of that property.
It's pretty amazing how the one time we actually get an accurate valuation, it's the sale price to Donald Trump's own daughter. So if ever we need like the accurate numbers, just look at what he would offer to sell it to his daughter for, and that's going to be the one and only time that we're actually going to get real numbers here.
Yeah. And, you know, there were other things that I think were damaging, although not dramatically damaging. You know, for example, there was a lot of questioning about some email traffic and some written documents concerning a loan that they were trying to obtain from Deutsche Bank. It looks like lots of other banks, lending institutions were unwilling to do business with Trump. I am not going to say legitimate banks, but it looked like they were kind of left to try to do business with Deutsche Bank. And there was one interesting passage that she was asked about. When they were trying to secure this loan from Deutsche Bank was apparently saying, well, look, you're going to have to, or your father's going to have to certify that his net worth, his net value is at least $3 billion. And she replied in writing saying, that's going to be a problem. And then there was some negotiating that went on where they were counter offering. Well, how about if dad says he's worth $2 billion? And they said, no. And they settled on $2.5 billion. Interestingly, not long after that, Donald Trump is bloviating about how he's worth $4 billion. So it's clear these numbers mean nothing.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be sort of any real value behind these numbers that they were just throwing out. It does also paint the picture that they were pretty desperate to get these big dollar loans. And it feels like, based on the questioning, they were willing to, let's just say, wheel and deal and come up with numbers that would be successful in, securing these loans or obtaining these loans.
Yeah, color me shocked. Glenn, how much more time until Judge Engoron will determine the damages in this case? He's already been found liable, so at this point it's just a matter of determining damages.
Yeah, it's a matter of how much they're going to have to disgorge, the technical term for how much of their ill-gotten gains, courtesy of fraud, they're going to have to pay back. And are they going to be barred from doing business in New York moving forward? Both of those things are pretty consequential to the Trump family. So right now they're going to move into the defense case. Ivanka Trump was the last witness put on the stand by A.G. James. And there has already been some wrangling over what witnesses will be permitted to testify and which witnesses will not be permitted to testify by the judge. Once that landscape becomes a little bit more clear, we'll know how much longer this trial may last. I have a feeling it will probably wrap up sometime next week, perhaps even early next week. And I suspect Judge Engoron will take some time to sort of come to the right decision, particularly with respect to the valuation, the disgorgement, how much they're going to have to pay back. But I'll tell you, it sure looks to me like the Trumps should be ordered not to do business in New York in the future, based on what a clown show this was. I mean, they could barely remember the fact that they were in business in New York at all, which, even if you take that at face value, doesn't really bode well for the prospect of them, being successful business people in New York moving forward.
Well, just to that point about the circus that was this whole trial, I mean, Donald Trump pretty much spent the entirety of this trial antagonizing the very judge who will unilaterally decide how much money he does have to disgorge. So I guess what's the strategy here? I mean, he didn't even make an effort to try to, play nice with the judge, but it's not like there's a jury here. It's not like anybody else is gonna be making this decision other than the one person who he spent all this time antagonizing.
Yeah, Brian, a pretty good rule of thumb for trial lawyers is don't piss off the finder of fact. Yeah. And the finder of fact in this case is not the jury, because there is no jury, it is the judge. So I can only imagine that the strategy that Donald Trump was going with was, one, spout out anything on the stand that he thinks will play to his base so he can package up sound bites and grift more money from his supporters. And then the other thing is, I think he already realizes that he has lost. He's lost the battle. He's lost the war in front of Judge Engoron. The judge has already ruled against him on liability and probably is about to bang him out for a big fat disgorgement and prohibit him from doing business in New York in the future. Then Donald Trump's only hope is to tie that decision up in appeals for as long as he can. And so I think it's probably a two-part strategy. One, playing to the base, and then two, trying to make as ugly a record as he can and try to take advantage of that ugliness on appeal. Yeah, trying to discredit the very judicial system that he's running to oversee as president of the United States. So it goes to show just how committed to the rule of law candidate actually is. So with that said, we'll obviously stay on top of all of this stuff as it continues to play out, not only this trial, but all of the other prosecutions that Trump is contending with. So if you're watching right now and you want to follow along, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Taylor Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.